Hello there, my name is Rilo Kai with Butcherbird Productions, and this is Blender Builds. This is a series where I time-lapse and narrate my general creative process when making models and animations in Blender. As you'll see in this video, I'm still learning Blender, but I think this might help people learning Blender themselves, or just wanting to get into 3D modeling in general. By getting a feel for the general learning process and workflow, and maybe by showing you my mistakes, you can learn from them too. This is the second part in a series about one of my character's signature pieces of clothing, a light brown leather trench coat. If you missed part 1, link is in the top right and in the description. Go check that out if you haven't already. This character I'm referring to, known as the Drifter, is also making an appearance in a D&D campaign that I'm playing with friends as an antagonist, along with his crew, the Browncoats. All of these villains wear one of these coats, known as Cloaks of Infinity. The character that gives the party the mission to hunt down the Browncoats has powers related to playing cards, so I wanted to make a calling or wanted cards for each of these characters and bring them into Tabletop Simulator. I created the base trench coat in the last Blender Builds video, and in this one I'm adding the character model, creating an armature for the trench coat, posing the model, and rendering the card face. This will be the first time I make a custom armature, and my trench coat's geometry is still causing problems, so you'll see how I deal with all that. Let's get into it. Right off the bat, I forgot to record something, which was importing the character model. I'm using the Final Fantasy XIV character creator and importing the character models from that. I'll eventually get to making my own character models, but for what I'm using them for, I think it's fine. So, with the character model imported, I start off by adjusting the trench coat to fit the model better and fixing that always pesky geometry. Here, I adjust some of the Drifter's geometry so it doesn't stick out of the coat. And then, we're back to adjusting the coat's geometry. Here, I finish adjusting the collar and do some more model editing. Here, I start trying to get the cloth simulation to work. To make a long video short, I tried a lot of different ways to get the cloth sim to work, but I eventually realized that to make the coat do what I wanted, I needed to give it an armature, as opposed to hoping it flowed the way I wanted with a cloth sim. Here's where I started making the armature. I locked the bones to the vertices of the coat so it would follow the shape better. I added a bone to each pocket so I could expand them if I needed to, and then put bones all the way down the coat so I could control the flow of it. I then added the collarbones and rounded out the collar a bit more. I fixed some more geometry around the armpits and then added the bones in the arms so they lined up with the character's bones as well. I then began to rename all the bones so I could identify them later. It was a long list. Then I started parenting the bones to where they needed to be. The flowing part and the arms were connected while everything else was offset. I realized here that something wasn't quite right and that my flowing bones were facing the wrong way. This is a pretty simple fix. Just select the bones you want to flip, go to Armature, and click Switch Directions. I was happy with the armature, so I decided to try some posing, but I wanted it to be more flowy. So I tried to use soft body physics to get that to work, but eventually I decided that I only needed the armature. Here, I tried to parent the coat's arm bones to the character's arm bones using the child of constraint, but there was a problem with this. If you have nested child of constraints, it doesn't follow the parent correctly. I stubbornly tried to get this to work for a while, but I eventually just disconnected the coat's arm bones from each other and had each one have a different child of constraint, and that worked like a charm. I then parented the chest, and then I had a working armature. Next, I needed to make the Drifter's second piece of signature clothing, his hat. However, I'm really sorry about this next part. but I made the drifter's hat without recording me actually building it, so we're starting off after I've built it and before I gave it a texture. I'm going to use the same texture as the coat, but make it a bit rougher and change the color a bit as well. I then played around with the creases a bit to make the edges rounder. What's a hat without a head hole? I cut through the bottom of the hat, but I quickly realized that I had screwed up my geometry again. I tried to fix it, but I eventually just reset and did it again the right way. Time to import the hat. I had to adjust the head hole some more, but it turned out pretty good. I had to move some of the drifter's hair under the hat so it didn't stick out, but that's what happens when you put on a hat anyway, right? I then parented the hat to the drifter's head using a child of constraint and adjusted the color of the coat to match the hat. Here, I just tried to get all the modifiers looking right. I added inverse kinematics to the coat and arms, and tried to put the drifter's hand into his pocket using it, but it didn't work out well. I didn't record something here, not sure what, but basically I'm trying to get the coat to pull along with the armature in a more flowing, natural way. I tried envelope bones first, then I tried weight painting the bones manually. Neither of these looked right. Just a fun trick here, if you're accidentally weight painting something you shouldn't be, go into edit mode and assign the vertices to vertex groups using the weight slider under vertex groups. It lets you see what vertexes are actually in your groups more accurately. I tried a lot of different ways of weight painting the bones, but I couldn't find one that looked natural. So, I turned to another model that had a similar coat, but was made by someone more experienced than I was. The answer to my problem was that the highest weight wasn't a full 1, but about a 0.8 at the main vertexes, and then it dropped off to around a 0.4 at the second one out, and then dropped off even harder farther out. This worked wonders, and my coat looked a lot better now. However, the arms and main body were full weight. Now began the process of making the render for the card. I made the camera portrait by flipping the pixel values and posed the drifter so his hands were in his pockets and his coat was flowing. Those pocket bones came in real handy now. And here's the flow. Here I posed the collar and tilted his head down. Now for lighting, I added a light from above so that his face was shrouded in shadow. Did some last minute modifier adjusting. And here I began doing some rendering to get everything looking right, specifically the freestyle lines, which are like outlines that Blender puts on the model post-process. Now, I changed the background to white so it matches a playing card. Here, I rotated the coat cuffs so they didn't mess with the freestyle lines as much. And now it's time for compositing. My goal here was to make an oval fade around the render. I did a lot of trial and error, but here's the nodes I ended up with for the effect. Let me give you a quick tour of how this thing works. To change the outer circle color, change the image color in the alpha over node. To change the shape of the ellipse, change the width and height in the ellipse mask node. To change the location of the ellipse, use the X and Y in the transform node. And changing the amount of blur is in the X and Y percent in the blur node. Bilateral blur is optional here, I just think it looks better. And back to the time-lapse, I did a little more fiddling around with the freestyle lines until I was happy with the result. Then finally, I imported to TTS, and this is what I ended up with. The card back is a placeholder, but it looks good so far. Next time, we'll be doing the other brown coats and their cards. Thanks for stopping by. Leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the other side.